Hi everyone, welcome to Queer in There. I'm Mark Zinneman,
And I'm Michael Ryan.
and we're so excited to have our special guest here today join us, Julius, David Kennerley.
It's great to be here.
Thanks for joining us, David.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So, set the scene for us. What was growing up like for you? Where are you from originally?
Well, I was raised in the farmlands of eastern Pennsylvania, and it was a very sleepy town. There was wheat fields and cornfields everywhere. I was one of 6 kids. My older brothers were like the star quarterbacks of their football team.
Okay, not you.
No, in fact, I was the quintessential geeky, skinny kid who was picked last for sports teams.
Can relate.
Yeah.
Very relatable.
Right.
Well, what brought you to New York?
What is often the story that you hear from people like me is I just wanted more. There wasn't enough for me at in the town that I grew up in, and I wanted to find a creative field, kind of explore my sexuality. I guess you could say. I mean, I maybe was sort of bi-curious, if that's the term we used to use back then.
Yeah.
And
did you feel like you were aware of that at the time, and that's why you moved to New York?
I think by then I was kind of suspected it, so I wanted to go out and strike it out on my own.
What was New York's kind of like calling card for you? What did New York mean to you from afar?
Well, I used to visit, say, once a year with my family, because I had family there, so I knew the excitement. I knew the cultural institutions. We would go to museums, and I just had heard so much about the creative explosion that was happening during that time.
So what year did you actually move to New York?
So yeah, it was in 1987.
Okay.
And I was in my late 20s. And what was great was just by complete accident, I ended up moving into West 23rd Street in Chelsea. Like, of all the places in all of New York.
You picked a gayer spot.
And it was actually right on the cusp of being gay at that point. It wasn't like the Chelsea boy wasn't born yet. It was just starting to come into its own as a gay mecca, because before that it was in the West Village and Greenwich Village.
So you brought the boys to the yard, basically.
That's right. Maybe.
So what was the first gay bar that you went to, or gay space that you went to once you landed in New York?
It was probably around 1989, and I went to a place called Uncle Charlie's, and it's on Greenwich Avenue, down in the Village, and it was one of those, I think what they called them back then were video cruise bars.
Mm-hmm.
Like, videos were just becoming popular, and so there were these big screens that you could watch music videos, and they had this great curved bar, so that when you went to order a drink, you could check out like the guys like across from you and sort of like whatever, smile and make eye contact.
And Uncle Charlie's was a chain, right? There was multiple.
There were, but I think most of the other ones had closed down by then, because I just knew it as Uncle Charlie's, even though I think it used to be called. Do you remember?
There was Uncle Charlie's downtown, Uncle Charlie's uptown, Greenwich Village. There was a restaurant at some point, I think.
Yeah.
The whole family.
They had a whole slew, yeah.
And what was walking into that space? Like, do you remember a first time, or was it kind of insignificant?
I mean, I do, because I was still closeted and curious. Like, I would go out with my straight friends on a Friday night, and or maybe even a girlfriend, and then say, it's 11 o'clock. I gotta go home. So, and I would go home, but I'd change into a jeans and t-shirt.
Yeah.
I'd get like a bottle of scotch and have like 2 shots. I'm serious. Blast some music and get fortified to go, which was really only like 4 blocks from my apartment at that point, to walk in. And it was thrilling and dangerous for me, because I hadn't really ever done that before. One of my memories is walking in. Back in those days, cologne was kind of a big thing with gay men.
Mm-hmm.
And like, you'd walk in and all of a sudden, I was not a cologne wearer, so like you'd smell this cologne as soon as you walked through the door, because everyone had, many people had their polo shirts and their sweaters around their necks, and but it was definitely mixed. There were other people from other parts of the city that would come there, because it was such a great spot.
So you were always going alone, basically, to Uncle Charlie's?
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, I also I don't know. I operate better when I'm alone.
Yeah. In terms of picking up
Yeah.
people? Yeah, there you go. Okay, well done.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about some clubs.
Okay.
Here you've been to a few.
Yes, I have.
Take us to the Roxy. Where is the Roxy? What was it like? Kind of paint a picture for us of what a night at the Roxy was like.
Okay. As luck would have it, I lived on 23rd and 9th. Roxy was on 18th and 10th.
Okay.
And so I also had a gay roommate who was a photographer, and so he was really well connected. And he would ask. He knew I was gay before I knew I was gay. Okay, so he's like, David, come to the Roxy, come to the Roxy. And I finally got up the courage to go. And what was amazing was you'd walk through the front doors, and there were these stairs, this long staircase, but it was very gradual. And I learned later that was because it used to be a truck parking garage, and so that was the ramp that the trucks would go up. So they just maintained that same incline. And you'd go up, and there'd be streams of mylar hanging from the ceiling, and so it just had this very much of this carnival vibe.
Mm-hmm.
And you go up there, you check your coat if it was winter, and then you'd walk into this space which was like the size of a football field. It felt like that.
Okay.
Wow.
And there was these two bars where on each end of the huge dance floor, and there were these each bar had like 5 or 6 hot go-go dancers just dancing around, and that was the first moment when you walk up, that's what you saw.
Sounds great to me.
Yeah.
And so what was West Chelsea like at this time? Right now, if I think of West Chelsea, I think of the High Line, I think of luxury condos. What was West Chelsea at that moment?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, especially like in the late 80s and the early 90s, New York was still kind of recovering from a financial crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So real estate was really cheap. And so that means that's why so many of the clubs thrived during that period, and why there are so few in Manhattan today.
Right.
And why they could be so big.
Yes, and why they could be so big. Exactly. There was the Roxy, and also in the meatpacking district was just below Chelsea. There was plenty of actually sex clubs in Western Chelsea as well. But yeah, there was no High Line. There was no that beautiful Hudson River Park, that we all love.
Right.
I mean, I loved it for different reasons back in the 80s and 90s because.
What reasons would those be?
Well, they were magnets for gay men to cruise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess going back to the Roxy, kind of what was the crowd that went to the Roxy?
Well, when I first started going, it was what I would consider to be this amazing, crazy quilt of all these different people converged at one time.
Mm-hmm.
You had the club kids, the drag queens, the lesbians, the adventurous straight people, the muscle guys, and then like the dweeby gay guys and the twinks. And even like bridge and tunnel types would come.
Right.
And we would all be dancing together, and it was the hosts were usually drag queens like Lahoma Van Sant and Lady Bunny, and they would like walk around dance around the dance floor with like toilet paper and just start like wrapping people around the toilet paper. And it just had a really jubilant, fun, very inclusive atmosphere.
And then speaking of fun and kind of joy, what's the music like? What's happening on the dance floor?
Okay, well, this was a time when house music became big. Like before that, like what I could call like the Saint era, which was in the 80s. It was more like anthems and women singing ballads and things like that.
The disco vocalists.
Yes. Yeah. And then house music came in, and that was actually more like Black Box, Madonna even. She definitely ushered in house music.
Did she perform at the Roxy even?
Madonna.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And of course, I wasn't fabulous enough to get an invitation or to know in advance. And like, I kind of heard a rumor, but I'm like, I'm not going to go all the way there to stand in line just to be turned away.
Right.
Because I wasn't the type that like, I mean, most people got free drink tickets and they got cut in line privileges. And I'm just like, oh, I'm just standing here in my t-shirt and jeans,
Just your regular average Joe at the Roxy.
Yeah.
Right.
Courteous and following the rules.
Right.
Do you have any favorite tracks that you remember being played at the Roxy or songs you fell in love with?
Honestly, there were remixes of songs, like some of the Madonna songs, and that was when they started to come the extended remixes. I remember there was this singer called Lisa Stansfield,
Sure.
and and she did this song called "I'm Leaving." And what was amazing was, I'll never forget that night. All my friends had left. It was like about to close, and that came on, and it just so happens during that time I was contemplating breaking up with my then boyfriend. This was like a little bit further into the 90s when I actually had real boyfriends. And I just I danced like I've never danced before, all by myself, singing the words, "I'm leaving." And the next day I had the courage to break up with my boyfriend. And it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. So thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah.
I love that. I guess it's interesting. You were telling us about going to your first gay bar in New York City, going alone to Uncle Charlie's. Like, did you find community at places like the Roxy, or where did you kind of find gay community?
Yeah. Well, I did, when I started going, I definitely, to the Roxy, I was with a small group of, like I said, my roommate. I think that's really, for me, what distinguishes clubs back then was you were going to find your community. You were going, it was such a difficult time during the 90s, obviously, it was the peak of the AIDS epidemic at the beginning of 1990. And so you kind of wanted to go to search for almost like brotherhood and community and support. And plus, during that time, they had many AIDS related benefits. So you could go, and it would be like a fundraiser for GMHC and for ACT UP. And so it was really almost a political statement back then to go out.
Sure.
Yeah.
The blend of activism and nightlife, especially at that time, is super important.
Yeah.
What were some other kind of parties or themed events that you remember from Roxy? Because I know they had a lot.
Honestly, to me, it's a bit of a blur. They also had this upstairs, which was real. Well, there was an evolution where it was, like I said, this carnival atmosphere. But as the 90s went on, John Blair had sort of taken over Saturday nights. And
who's John Blair?
He is a promoter that's still promoting parties now. And his aesthetic tended to be to bring in the muscle guys. Okay. So, and then that's all of his club invites have pictures of these really robust, healthy looking muscle guys, and which frankly, during an era where a lot of the images of gay men unfortunately were emaciated and sick, this was sort of a counterbalance to that. So he was promoting that, and then these guys would take a look at the advertising and the club invites, and they'd be like, "Oh, I want to look like that." So they would go to the gym to look like that. So it sort of was it spurred each other on to create this healthy, fun, sexy gay crowd.
I love that you can learn kind of from the Club Flyers. Like, these things are in conversation with each other. What was happening with the health crisis at the time, and what people needed out of nightlife and community spaces.
Yeah.
So interesting.
The aesthetics on the Flyers shaped nightlife and vice versa.
Yeah.
I want to take us a bit further in Chelsea to another club I know you went to, the Limelight. What can you tell us about when you first started going there and what made that club so unique?
Sure. I mean, okay, well, first of all, as most people in New York at least know, the Limelight was built in a Gothic church. I think it was maybe in the 1840s it was built. And so they kept a lot of the original details, like this stunning stained glass windows, and this, it was Gothic. So these high arches and these old beams that were just so gorgeous. So you'd walk in, and what was also great was not only was that this massive dance floor was in the place where people worshipped, there was also this kind of mezzanine gallery that you could go up and check out everyone and watch. And there was these huge cages that were suspended from the ceiling that had go-go dancers. So you kind of had that going around, and of course the lighting, which was always amazing there. yeah, so there was the main part, but the back part, which I think was maybe the church rectory, got shaped into a number of other smaller spaces, and they had other parties there. Like there's one called Shampoo, and then the promoter Mark Berkeley, he held more sexy type parties called Lick It at Limelight, and Res Erection, RES
My favorite name.
dash Erection.
So clever.
Yeah.
So at the Limelight, what's the crowd like that goes to the Limelight?
You know, it kind of depended on the night. As many of these clubs, I mean, like we say that they're gay clubs, but they're really more like gay centric clubs. And I mean, certainly some nights they had something called the Rock and Roll Church, and that was much more of a mixed crowd where they had always these amazing celebrity singers, performers.
What's a standout memory you have from Limelight?
Okay, so it was on a party called Disco 2000, which was on Wednesdays, and it was held by Michael Alec, who most people know is very notorious for being convicted for the murder and dismemberment of Angel Melendez, another club kid. So,
and also was leader of the club kid.
Yeah,
basically.
yes, yep, he was the ringleader. So he held this party. I don't remember the name of it, but I know it was sort of church oriented, where at this like midnight, like the bell would toll, and everyone,
the actual church bell.
Yeah,
Wow.
and it would, or else they had a fake one, but I'm not sure.
Quasimodo up there.
Yeah. So, and it was sort of supposed to be a takeoff of getting Holy Communion, and so they had these troughs full of what they said was ecstasy punch, and so everyone crowded around these troughs to get their communion, and they handed out, with a ladle, like everyone got their little punch cups. And I was like, wait, this reminds me of like, I don't know, like the Jonestown Massacre where they drink the Kool-Aid. Like we don't know what's in this really,
Right.
But we all still took
lined
it.
up.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Right. And Michael was there, like saying, come on.
Yeah.
He's like, let my people come. So, but what happened was, everyone, like an hour later, everybody was on the same level, shall we say, in terms of joy. And it was kind of a brilliant idea. I don't know if they could do that now. Back then,
Probably not.
They could do it.
And how was the rest of your night that evening?
I made a lot of new friends.
Great.
Yeah.
Building community.
Exactly.
With the Limelight, it's so interesting. It's in this sort of sacred space. But then, is this also space for kind of hedonism and debauchery? And did that interplay mean anything to you, or was it all just kind of fun and costume?
No, I actually think that the symbolism wasn't launched on me, but I would also say, and like even the names of some of their parties, like one was called Mass, like it was sort of meant in a way, it was our place of worship. I mean, for many or quite a few gay people, at least that I know, they're not regular churchgoers in terms of believing in God and different parts of religions. So like that, in a way, became our religion, was to go out to the gay clubs and
commune on the dance floor.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a long legacy of like religious tinge gay clubs and mega clubs, including Sanctuary, and Limelight is one of them.
Oh, right, Sanctuary, exactly. Yeah.
And it's just interesting, the kind of real estate story in New York, where these churches are kind of like losing their congregations as the population is decreasing, and so they become these huge.
There's so many empty churches in New York.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, right now the Limelight is like 90% empty. They do have two restaurants there now, but the main space is empty. And I'm like, why can't they make another club there?
Right. More clubs and churches. Yeah. And then is the music different from the Roxy? Do these spaces, Limelight and the Roxy, feel different, or are they part of a similar vibe in a specific era?
I would say, again, it depends on the night, it depends on the DJ, and also it did evolve over the years as well. Like for instance, with the Roxy, while things were very house music, and by that I sometimes mean just, oh, there's vocals, oh, there's a melody. And then it started to get a little bit harsher, especially as the night wore on, or else later in the decade.
Harsher in terms of musical style?
Harsher, yeah. It was more like percussive and maybe tribal-y, and
the pots and pans kind of music.
Yes, exactly. Right. And some people loved it. I wasn't such a fan of it, I guess because I was maybe a little bit older and I kind of like a melody.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with that.
Right. So yeah, so there was an evolution even at the same club over the course of the 90s.
When did you stop going to Limelight, or what do you know about its demise?
So I pretty much stopped going to both of those clubs regularly at 2000, because at that point I had just turned 40 and I'm like looking in the mirror going, okay, do I really need to be doing this quite as often?
Yeah.
But I still certainly went out occasionally, but and it just so happened, I mean, both of those clubs had amazing runs. The Roxy actually started in 1978, I think, as a roller rink, and went all the way through to 2007. And then
in nightlife years, that's huge.
Yes, that's huge. I mean, yeah, there was it had a little period that was more hip hoppy and where they called it 1018, but that was just a couple of years and went back to the Roxy. And then the Limelight, it kind of evolved after around 2000. John Blair took it over and he rebranded it something called Avalon, and then also he tried again with Estate, or maybe it was the other way around. I can't remember. But so, and then by also 2007, he just threw in the towel. It just wasn't viable anymore. It had petered out.
Right. And the neighborhood is changing.
Yes. Yeah. And also, I mean, not just the neighborhood, but when you talk about other reasons to be going out to clubs, I mean, halfway through, which is, amazing, halfway through the 90s, around 1996, the first protease inhibitors came out, which meant that when you got HAV and you went to your doctor, instead of him saying, oh, well, I'm sorry, but you may not have too many years to live. Right. It was, oh, okay, we'll put you on this, this, and this. And people started living longer. Right. So the reasons to go to clubs were a little bit different. The feeling was different.
It was less of a death sentence.
Yes.
At that time.
Absolutely.
So it's the late 80s, early 90s, peak of the AIDS crisis. Tell us more about kind of going out at that time and what you personally got from these spaces and what you think the larger community got from these spaces.
One of the things that I think is really important to understand is that almost every major club night, they tried to make sure that they were a benefit for an AIDS-related cause, whether it be GMHC or ACT UP, or there's something called the New York State Pride Agenda, which was a political action group. And so that, so they really were places, it wasn't just to have a great time. It was also a place to come together as a community. And don't forget, I mean, the government wasn't doing anything, especially like towards the 80s and the end of the 80s, which is why ACT UP was formed. And so it just felt like, well, we need to come together as a community, and the clubs would actually be part of that. Also, I mean, I've spoken to, there's AIDS activist, his name is Peter Staley, and he would say that clubs, as for activists, they would go to the clubs to kind of almost recharge and remind themselves why they're fighting so hard. They're fighting so hard for this community, and it was one of the few chances where they could achieve joy, and so
unwind after
right,
meeting.
and kind of forget like all the hell that's actually going on and all the people that are dying. So it was a bit of an escape, especially for these activists that have worked so hard for the
community. Right, a real kind of cathartic release. It sounds like that was needed.
And so, as you recall, during the 90s, Bill Clinton also ran for election. And so the gay community was very much behind him because he was one of the only candidates ever to really start talking about LGBT causes. And, even as we all know, that one of his promises was to end the ban on gays in the military, which didn't quite work out so well. But At least he tried.
Yeah.
There was some political activism as well. Like I remember going to a party at the Roxy, which was just called Vote and Dance. So it was like the night before the election. It was like a voters drive, and it was just to get people psyched to make sure that their voice was heard.
That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, these spaces are so important both for people finding community, but also actual political activism.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about kind of how the Roxy, Limelight, they all eventually close. What is the kind of cultural legacy of both of those spaces?
I mean, first, I think we should talk a little bit about why they closed, which has to do with real estate. And so at some point, people realized that all these fringy, kind of dilapidated areas like the meatpacking in Chelsea and even in the Village were, hey, they could make a lot of money if they developed. So they changed the zoning laws. They developed community boards that got a lot of power. And so they're like, no, we don't want this in our community, so we're going to vote it out, or we're going to fine it. There were laws that were created that would criminalize club promoters and owners if the patrons were arrested for drugs.
Right.
That they would actually penalize the promoters and owners. So that was a disincentive for being a club owner, and so they just would knock them down. Almost all of the big, massive spaces are now luxury condos or retail complexes, and like I said, the Limelight is sort of half vacant.
Right. And so, what can you tell us about Saint at Large, which sort of counterbalanced that as one of the earliest circuit parties?
Right. Well, I mean, as most people that know anything about queer history must have heard about the Saint, which was this notorious club that was male only in the 80s. And sadly, what happened was, as the 80s went on, they started losing their membership to their membership dying. And it turns out that like over a third of them in just like 3 years had perished. And so there was even talk before AIDS had a name, they called it the Saints disease because so many people from the Saints were dying, unfortunately.
Right. And it's such a visible loss that you can see in that direct membership.
Yes. What happened was, so that was shut down, and then a few years later, it was decided, well, let's still have Saint-spirited parties, but in different locations, and sort of that's how the circuit party really got started, because it would just be in one location for one big night, and they would have these parties. One was called the White Party, and everybody would dress in white, so you'd walk in, and usually they were in really large venues. My favorite was the Roseland, because it was such a massive space, and just this sea of, honestly, I mean, I'm not exaggerating, you could fit 4,000 people at one moment inside the Roseland, and then over the course of the night, like 6,000 guys cycled through there, and to see a whole room of, and everyone did it. Everyone like wore white. It was amazing. So
we love a dress code.
Yes, and that was very uplifting. And
5,000 gay men in white sounds crazy.
Yes, and believe me, and it was but it was uplifting. There was a DJ who had spun at the Saint named Robbie Lisley, who actually is still on the circuit today. And yes, so he often headlines the White Party. The other thing to keep in mind is that they were hiring the best sound engineers, the best lighting designers, and then they would have stage shows. So it was a whole immersive experience. It was just incredible, right? And then obviously for those who were taking drugs, it just kicked it up another notch.
Sure.
So and then the other big party, which was my personal favorite, was the Black Party, and that was obviously had more of a darker edge. It was more leather oriented, so lots of harnesses, very, very sexy, and so that was often held at the Roseland. It was notorious for its back room, which is, caused a little bit of controversy, obviously, because, there was still, they had free condoms and all that.
But there's this tension between kind of sexual liberation and safe sex and being responsible.
Yeah. So it was tension and sometimes contradiction.
Sure.
Like you go, I don't know if it was necessarily the same, but like you go to the Limelight and they would have a back room at their, it was called the Lick It Lounge for Lick It at Limelight party. And there'd be, a small room that was pretty dark, and there'd be this sign saying, no lips below the hips. And you're just like, well, what's the point?
Yeah.
But they had to have it, it was kind of like, whatever, like nowadays.
How many people follow that?
Right. It's kind of like now you'll still see signs for like stand 6 feet apart, like at the grocery store, and you're like, no.
Yeah.
So it was a contradiction. They'd even have a monitor with a flashlight would go in and kind of check around, and if there was anything that was too hardcore, they would scare you out of the back room.
Right.
But getting back to your question, the Saint, so the legacy of the Saint was carried on for many years, and they had a lot of people who were from the original Saints, and then of course they attracted new members, and it became this big circuit party where people from all over, now that the internet was happening, like people could learn about events a lot more openly in different parts of the country. So you'd have all these guys from all over the country, even all over the world, coming to these Saint parties, Saint at Large parties.
How often were the Saint at Large parties held?
It varied from year to year. There was definitely always the white party, the black party, and then sometimes they'd have special holiday parties, like a New Year's Eve party. I remember going to one at the Roxy, and Valentine's Day and Halloween, which was fun because that lent itself to all kinds of wild costumes. So, I mean, I'm going to say during its heyday, they would have like maybe 4 or 5 a year. Now, they don't have any.
Right. Yeah. But that really kind of like innovated the circuit party, and then all these copycats came, and now that's a huge part of gay culture.
Exactly. Yes.
The birth of the circuit party.
Basically.
Thank you, Saint at Large.
And you don't have to worry about the permanent, real estate structure anymore.
Right. Which in a way is sort of what's happening now, where there are few venues, even in Brooklyn, that have like a weekly dedicated gay party. It's more like, okay, we're going to have this great party at the Knockdown Center. We're going to have this great party at $3 Bill. But it's not what, I mean, there are less regular parties. They're more one-off whenever we can get our act together to do it. Parties.
Yes. Right.
So David, one thing I know is that you started collecting club flyers when you were going out. Can you talk about how that came about and show us some from your collection?
Yeah, sure. Besides being a club goer, I was also, I guess, what you would call like a hoarder. And
Sure.
When I would go to these clubs, you would leave at the end of the night, and they'd have these promoters, like 2 or 3 of them standing at the exits, and they would hand out these cardboard invites or flyers for parties for the next week. And most people would not even look at it and just throw it on the sidewalk. But I just thought because I was still just kind of coming out and new to the scene, I just thought they were amazing. They had, hot guys and drag queens and club kids and activists. And I just thought that they were fascinating. So I'm like, you know what? I'm saving mine.
Mm-hmm.
So I just started a collection, and then you could get on some mailing lists as well. Like John Blair had a mailing list, Palladium had a mailing list. And so I would get all these invites through the mail, and then I would go to, back then they had more queer oriented stores, such as a different bookstore or Rainbows and Triangles on 8th Avenue in Chelsea. And so they'd have stacks of these invites that I'd go up and say, oh, this one looks good, this one looks good. And I did that for the entire decade, and I managed to collect 1,200 of these things.
That's incredible.
Right. So I didn't go out to all these clubs every night to collect them.
Right.
I actually was people said that they were so amazing that maybe I should do some sort of book.
And we're so excited for the book. I love the cover, actually. I have it here. Getting in NYC Club Flyers from the gay 1990s. I love this. And you guys are working on this project together.
Yeah, I heard about this project, and I was like, this has to be a thing, and I want to help. So
Yes.
I've been helping. And you brought some flyers that are featured in the book. Maybe you want to show some of them?
Yeah, sure. First, I just wanted, Mark's being modest. He's been invaluable with researching and interviewing some people, because not only are they showing images of, not only is the book showing images of the Flyers, but we interviewed a number of people whose names were on the Flyers. So it was, it could be the DJs or the promoters or the drag queens and even the photographers or the designers of these
Go-Go
Flyers.
Boys. Really, everyone's in there.
The whole community.
Yeah. So, and also, most importantly, Michael Musto, who's been this nightlife guru for years and years and years. He's best known for his Village Voice column called La Dolce Musto, and he's still very much in the scene.
Of course.
It's like the voice of New York City nightlife.
Yeah.
Basically.
So I was very honored and thrilled and thankful that he agreed to do the foreword of the book.
Well, I love that because he has chronicled the whole era in kind of word, and you've been chronicling it with visuals.
Yes.
With 1,200 Flyers?
Yes, I have
Amazing.
1,200, and I narrowed it down to 230 for the book.
Okay.
Yeah. So there
may be a volume 2.
There might be a volume 2.
Okay, cool.
So I just wanted to quickly show.
That'd be great.
Sort of a mix. Like this is from the Roxy, and this is sort of in the beginning of the era because it's more drag queen focus. Brenda Agogo was a famous drag queen back then, and then the other side is sort of the masculine muscle Chelsea boy.
Yeah,
and
hot.
they also had
Muscle on wheels.
Yes, because they had rollers to honor the roots of the roller skating rink. They would actually have gay roller skating nights in the middle of the week.
Bring that back.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and then for Limelight, I because I think of it more as a club kid.
Mm-hmm.
So here's one where it's Goldilocks was his name, and he's with someone called Janet Poison, and it was for their crazy wacky party called Shampoo at the Limelight.
Shampoo, as you can see.
And then here is Lick It at Limelight. And what I love about this is that an artist named Broadway just drew this marvelous image, I should say, this marvelous illustration of this young man. And on the back, it actually talks about a benefit for Queer Nation, which is one of the big groups back then that was fighting for LGBTQ rights.
I love this though, because even just the Flyers, you get so much information of, the stars of the era, the causes of the era, and also just how they market a night and sort of what community they're trying to attract.
Right. And in the book, I tried to make them as large as possible so you could read some of the fine print, because that often gave more information about the flavor of what the party was and culture.
Always read the fine print.
Yes. And now this one is more of a circuit party called the Butch Ball, and they're using the Tom of Finland imagery, which yes, we had to get special permission to use that in the book.
Tom of Finland.
Yes, and that was at Twilo, a club that used to be called Sound Factory on 27th Street, and then when Sound Factory left, Twilo happened.
Open bar. Okay.
Yeah.
And guess what it is now?
It is a performance space called the McKittrick Hotel.
Sleep No More.
Yep.
Yep.
So, and then this is someone that most people would recognize as Lady Bunny.
Legend.
So a lot of these what I loved about a lot of these clubs were invites was that they would feature they would turn local people into celebrities, such as the drag queens like Lady Bunny. There's a
lot of drag queens on here. Lady Bunny, Mona Foote, Linda Simpson, really great legends here.
Yeah. And that was at Webster Hall, which actually is still holding parties to this day. Yeah. And then this is a club that some people might know because it's still around, Barracuda.
Hey, Barracuda.
One of the few remaining.
Yes. And they had something called Mona Foote's Star Search, which was said to be the precursor for the RuPaul's Drag Race.
So a competitive weekly show.
Yes.
Okay.
Before Ru, there was Mona.
And now these are a couple of what I was talking about, more political and activist oriented. This one
I love this
is
one.
a party at the Limelight, and there was a phrase that was used back then: "Safe sex is hot sex," to try to get guys to wear condoms.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a huge campaign.
And so this would be handed out at the end of the night.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
And another one is at this place in the Meatpacking District called Meat, and this is when they had ACT UP benefit. And this also had like a small frisky back room as well.
Meat for a cause.
Yeah.
So
And
good.
the
So
18.
good.
Yeah.
And then there's also a party called Factoria, which jumped around. It was at a place called Sound Factory Bar, and then it went to Twilo. And this would appeal more to men of color.
You have Jelly Bean featured. I love it.
And then finally, I've got a couple of the more sort of sex club back room. There was a party at Crowbar in the East Village called Spunk.
I love these like DIY feels of these flyers.
Yeah, actually feeling the like texture of the flyers.
This is straight up like photocopier,
Yeah.
1991 material.
Yeah, and as the decade progressed, that's when like Macs became more popular, so the invites got more sophisticated. So usually like the ones that are Xerox were the ones from the earlier part of the decade. And then the other two, this one is at a place called King, and it was a big dick contest. When's the last time you've ever heard of a big dick contest being advertised
at a club?
At a club.
I mean, the sophistication is unreal.
And then finally, I got a kick out of this because it's also meant to be a back room, and it's a glory hole to go.
Traveling glory hole.
Right.
How you set yourself apart.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so this is at Manhole. Oh, yes. I love this collection so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks for bringing it,
Sure.
and thank you for joining us today. It's been amazing chatting with you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Cheers. Thanks
Cheers.
for keeping these spaces alive.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.